welcome everybody to tonight's meeting. Just before we start, just a couple of bits of information. One is that there's going to be an update on the website under resources. Sarah and I recently went to a training day and we were given a mass of different websites where you can go and get information from. And if you've got something you want to research, you're bound to find something that you probably haven't found yet. I don't know how this person got all this information, but it was amazing. And on top of that, I'm putting a call out for people. If you're doing a bit of your own research, if you would like to write a paragraph or a couple of A-sides to put into the quarterly newsletter to share the information that you found out, or put a call out to other people for information, that would be really, really great. We're trying to sort of expand our knowledge base and call on the members to add to the knowledge base. So without further ado, I would like to introduce someone that you may not have met before, but I'm sure you will recognise, and that's obviously in jest. So Alastair, who's going to give a really interesting talk on Mr. Smeaton. Over to you, Alastair.
Oh, thanks, Damon. For people who haven't seen me before, yes, I'm Alastair Robertson. I'm the recently retired chair of Alston Moor Historical Society, and Damon has nobly stepped into the place. I've lived on Alston Moor for over 30 years, and it's like a county in itself, and there's a rich depth of history of all sorts, going back to the Bronze Age up to the recent photographic and oral history era. All sorts of aspects of industrial history, social history, political history, and all things come to light continually. For instance, the involvement of John Smeaton on Alston Moor. So I'll get straight into the talk, and I'll take questions after the talk and any comments. But if you feel the urge to say something, there is a chat facility where you can write a little comment, which will appear on a sidebar later on. So this is John Smeaton, and in the background we have his most iconic project, the Eddystone Lighthouse. And John Smeaton was the first man ever to describe himself as a civil engineer. This was a term he introduced to the world in 1768. He was born 300 years ago, almost to the day, and here we are on the 5th of June. He was born on the 8th of June, 1724, and there will be commemorations elsewhere in the country, perhaps elsewhere in the world, for this 300th anniversary. He was born at Austhorpe, if that's the correct pronunciation, near Leeds in Yorkshire, where he lived all his life until 1792. He began his working career as a maker of scientific instruments, and it wasn't until 1753 that he obtained his first commission as an engineer to design a watermill in Lancashire. And during the next few years, he designed at least 3 mills. He reported on 2 land drainage schemes, a harbour project, 2 bridges, 3 river navigations, and all the time he was carrying out original scientific research, for which he was awarded the Copley Medal by the Royal Society in 1759. And the Copley Medal is still awarded today for sustained outstanding achievements in any field of science. On Alston Moor, he's known to have been responsible for 3 important construction projects: a corn mill in the centre of the town in 1767, a new church in 1769, and an underground canal called the Nentforce Level in 1775. And now here's a little disclaimer. During this talk, any comments and asides that you'll hear from me are mine and not necessarily the views of anyone else. So John Smeaton is best known for his version of the Eddystone Lighthouse, which was completed in 1759. In this, he devised a system of cutting, interlocking stones like a jigsaw vertically and horizontally that did not need mortar in the joints. His lighthouse was the first successful lighthouse on Eddystone Rock. It withstood all the storms that had demolished the first lighthouse and the fire that had destroyed the second. This is a page from the minute book of the meetings of the commissioners of the Greenwich Hospital. Most of the page is devoted to the application for the post of joint receiver to the Greenwich Hospital. Oops, sorry. Sorry, I've just lost my place. Most of the page from here to here is devoted to the application from Edward Rodham, and only one short paragraph in a sentence is that given over to John Smeaton. In 1764, at the age of 40, John Smeaton applied for the post of joint receiver to the Greenwich Hospital, the Lords of the Manor of the former Derwentwater estates in Northumberland and on Alston Moor in Cumberland. So in the face of stiff competition for such a congenial post, which was described by his biographer, Professor A.W. Skempton, the field was whittled down to two applicants, Edward Rodham and John Smeaton. In his application, Smeaton had the faithful and friendly support of Sir Francis Gosling, Alderman of London and one of the hospital's commissioners. Part of his glowing reference read, "An ingenious, sensible man whose character for his great skill in mines and waterworks is too well known to require anything further to be said upon it." But his application raises three questions. Firstly, why did he apply for the job? Secondly, why did the Greenwich Hospital choose him above Edward Rodham? And thirdly, why did the commissioners not choose Rodham? So looking at this question, surely the nature of the job is in its title, receiver. The task of the receiver was to receive the rents and dues from the tenants of the Derwentwater estates and to administer those estates. John Smeaton was an engineer, not an estate manager. Edward Rodham, in his lengthy reference, had 70 referees, and from the little I've been able to find out about him, he was ideally suited for the job. He was 47. He owned Brandon White House at Rodham near Chillingham in Northumberland. He was a JP. He was on the grand jury for Northumberland. His 70 referees included the mine owners and estate owners, Sir Walter Blackett and Sir Edward Blackett of Allendale, who were to attend the meeting in person, and the influential Charles Bennet, 3rd Earl of Tankerville of Chillingham Castle, whose family had made its fortune from their agricultural estates, who were all gentlemen of rank and consideration in the county. This is John Smeaton's home of Austhorpe near Leeds. To return to the first question, why did John Smeaton apply for the job? As Philip Newell wrote in his book about the Greenwich Hospital, John Smeaton was then at the height of his powers and in great demand as an engineer. He had contracts the length and breadth of the country. He can't have been short of money. But the fact was he did actually need money, or at least a guaranteed regular and substantial income. In his consulting work, there would often be long delays in payments for his services, which led to the need for him to economize, and he needed funds to invest in necessary and expensive renovations at Austhorpe and for the construction of a workshop, laboratory, and office. In the foreground of this etching is the workshop and laboratory. The tower, incidentally, was built tall enough to be above the surrounding trees to assist in his astronomical observations. To quote from his biography, the building was in the form of a square tower, 4 stories high. The basement, or ground floor, contained his forge. The first floor, his lathe. The second, his models. The third was his drawing room and study. And the fourth was a sort of lumber room and attic. This is a minute from the commissioner's minute books of the meetings, recording the receipt of a letter from John Smeaton. So to look at the third question, why did the commissioners not choose Rodham? If estate management was the main requirement, Edward Rodham was the man. So why employ an engineer? If an engineer was needed, the services of John Smeaton could be called on as and when required, without the need for him to be a permanent member of staff. Nevertheless, he was the choice for the hospital. And as to why did the Greenwich Hospital choose him above Edward Rodham, it would appear that estate management was not the main requirement for the Greenwich Hospital. They had realized by this point in the Industrial Revolution that better management and the physical improvement of the mines and machines on the estate was necessary. Modernization at a practical, mechanical level, in fact. On the 30th of December 1764, John Smeaton was offered the post of receiver at a salary of between 400 and 500 a year, about 60,000 to 70,000 pounds today. On the 9th of January 1765, his acceptance was noted, in which he made it clear that he planned to reside in the north for only 3 or 4 months of the year, in all and at other times as required, and that no future engagements shall in the least interfere with the discharge of his duty. And yet, having declared this, while he was with the Greenwich Hospital, he had many other interests: mills, machines, steam engines, harbours, including the harbour at Ramsgate, canals, among which were 38 miles of canals in Scotland, a wharf at Greenwich Hospital, and then in 1771 he founded the Society of Civil Engineers. This is only 3 years after he invented the term. The Society of Civil Engineers in London that later became the Smeatonian Society. So we have to wonder whether he actually spent his promised 4 months a year in the north. The man who carried out the bulk of the regular duties was his fellow receiver, Nicholas Walton Jr., who had succeeded his father, Nicholas Walton Sr. On Wednesday, the 6th of March, 1765, John Smeaton arrived at the Derwentwater Estates Office in Farn Acres near Newcastle, the home and workplace of Nicholas Walton, from where he wrote to the Secretary of the Greenwich Hospital, John Ibbotson, on Friday the 8th of March, I think myself very happy in being placed in conjunction with so very agreeable a partner, and don't doubt that we shall readily concur in every measure that shall appear to be for the good of the trust for which we are jointly concerned. Now, one would have thought that there would have been jealousy and resentment on the part of Nicholas Walton, but in fact the two men got on very well. And perhaps John Smeaton's arrival was an opportunity to take a fresh look at the way the estates were managed. In The Life of Mr. John Smeaton, from the reports of the late John Smeaton, published in 1812, it was acknowledged that the estates required better than common management, and above all, that knowledge necessary to bring mines of lead and coal to the most productive effect. With regard to Alston Moor, Nicholas Walton had been examining the economics of the lead mines of Alston, but up to Smeaton's time, the Greenwich Hospital had been content to follow, in general, the old customs established by the Derwentwater family. Again, to quote from the reports of Smeaton's works, machines of all kinds and better means on a great plan were devised for a more easy and ample working these mines by Mr. Smeaton, while the correct judgment, patient industry, and great abilities and sincerity of Mr. Walton the Younger of Farn Acres near Newcastle, his partner in the duty of receiver, taking upon himself the management and the accounts, left Mr. Smeaton leisure and opportunity to exert his abilities on these works, as well as to make many improvements in the whole estate of the Greenwich Hospital. And the administration was such that it could be dealt with by one man, Nicholas Walton. Excuse me. Certainly, by looking at the list of his works in his biography edited by Professor Skempton, John Smeaton's commitment to the Greenwich Hospital didn't affect the number of his commissions elsewhere. Excuse me. So coming on to Alston Moor, how can we find out about his involvement here? With regard to his employment with the Greenwich Hospital, his biography by Professor Skempton only notes his application and his resignation, with nothing in between. In Appendix 3, the list of his works, Alston Grist Mill and the Nentforce Level are included in name only, so we can't learn very much there. The bulk of the routine management of the estates was undertaken by Nicholas Walton. From newspapers of the day, we can see a couple of examples. Here, a colliery with a limestone quarry and kilns at Scrumiston near Berwick was to be leased in 1767. Apply to Messrs. Walton and Smeaton. So apply to Messrs. Walton and Smeaton at Farnacres. In 1772, 1,600 trees were for sale at Bywell in the Tyne Valley. For further particulars, apply to Messrs. Walton and Smeaton again. Now, it's interesting to note that it's Nicholas Walton's name that appears first, and that no great noise is made about the fact that it's the famous John Smeaton is the other receiver. So with regard to the daily routine, was Smeaton even aware of transactions such as these? So we come to Smeaton's work on Alston Moor. Now, anybody who knows about the mines on Alston Moor and Smeaton's involvement will wonder why I'm showing this. So first of all, here is a myth to be dispelled, or is it? This is Rotherham or Rotherham lead mine on the Blackburn to the west of the South Tyne. In the Bible of Mining and Geology of the region, Geology of the North Pennine Orefield, Volume 1, Tyne to Stainmore, Sir Kingsley Dunham states on page 125 that the Blackburn level, formerly the working entrance to the mine, was engineered by Smeaton. But he does not give the source of his information, and the statement is found nowhere else. So until that source is found, we have to dismiss Rotherham mine from Smeaton's canon of work. This is Mr. Westgarth's statical engine. During Smeaton's tenure here, hydraulic engines were being introduced to mines in the area. Engines powered by water were being used to pump water from the mines and to drain them for working. John Smeaton was not too grand to give credit and recognition to other men. An engine was invented at Coalclough mine at the head of West Allendale, adjacent to Nenthead on Alston Moor, by a local man, William Westgarth, who was the principal agent for Sir Walter Blackett. John Smeaton saw this machine working, the first one to be made for draining the mines, in the summer of 1765. And he was full of admiration and praise for William Westgarth, referring to him as the very ingenious Mr. William Westgarth at Coalclough. 14 years later, in 1779, in his report on the mines at Lead Hills in South Lanarkshire, writing from his home at Austhorpe, he recommended the installation of Westgarth's statical engine. The engine at Coalclough had worked by this time faultlessly since its construction, without ever being subject to any material disorder other than common repairs. 3 or 4 more engines had been made by William Westgarth for mines on Alston Moor. Smeaton so greatly admired the modesty of Westgarth in not applying for a patent, which in any case would have taken years to be effective, if ever, and instead he showed off his machine for the public good. Smeaton persuaded William Westgarth to present a model and plan of his invention to the Society of Arts in 1769. And the Society showed its appreciation by voting Mr. Westgarth a bounty of 50 guineas for the encouragement of arts, manufactures, and commerce. John Smeaton also wrote a letter of recommendation to the Society, but William Westgarth died before this could be possible. This is the High Mill today in Alston. Literally today, I took this photograph. You can see a spot of rain right in the middle of the screen. I thought I did have a photograph, but I didn't. So on a dull, rainy day, Here is the High Mill in Alston, with the wheelhouse to the left. This long sloping, peculiar shaped, narrow building is the wheelhouse of the mill. And if you look closely at the mill, here's a structural join here and a difference in the construction up there. So the mill prospered. This building here is Smeaton's original building. It's been extended sideways and vertically as it increased its capacity to cope with demand. During his part-time employment with Greenwich Hospital, John Smeaton designed 20 corn mills, one of which was the High Mill at Alston. His experience with water power and corn mills made him the obvious choice when the Greenwich Hospital called for an engineer to build a new mill in the town. Smeaton designed the new mill with new machinery in about 1767. The old mill was completely demolished. The footprint of the old mill can be made out by this thin line here, following the arrow around. That is the old mill, raised to the ground. The wheel pit is in about the same place, with the water that drove the wheel going off, exiting into the mill race. And curiously, for people who know the town, it looks as though there's an open water course running here. Now, where that came from, and this is the mill race, which actually now disappears off the bottom of the screen, but this water course is very curious. So these are the elevations as drawn by John Smeaton. By 1770, and what we saw before, this is the view that we saw in the photograph, and this is the vertical join that I showed. These two windows are recognizable. Another window has been introduced here. This door has been blocked up, and this is now the entrance, still the entrance into the old mill building, and this is the wheelhouse. In Smeaton's time, the entrance to the wheelhouse was at the back of the building, or what we think of as the back of the building now. The doorway, the new doorway, well, the doorway that we enter the wheelhouse now is in this wall here. So by 1775, construction was finished and the mill was available for rent. In 1801, Alston Mill was let to William Todd at £42 per annum for 21 years to expire in 1821. Alston Moor Historical Society is grateful to the Royal Society for the grant of the licence to reproduce these plans for the water mill in Alston, Cumberland. The whole set of drawings shows the wide range of Smeaton's talents, his abilities and his attention to detail, from the general appearance of the building to the general concept of the machinery, down to the number of teeth on the cogwheel, the microscopic detail of that small part of a machine, to the overall concept. It's impossible nowadays for one person to conceive of an idea from the grand scheme down to the finest detail. Everything nowadays is too specialized. So this is the wheel, Smeaton's wheel. His wheel was 30 feet diameter, or 9.1 meters, with a width of 10 inches or 25 centimeters, and a scoop feed for the water, which in particular was thought to be an unusual feature, and that the whole design probably indicated the lack of a good, strong water supply. In 1805, a visitation by the commissioners of the Greenwich Hospital reported that the water wheel is of large dimension and was planned many years ago by Mr. Smeaton. There are 2 pairs of stones, 1, 2, and the usual machinery, and the mill is capable of doing much business, and although old, appears to be in a tolerable state of repair, except the water wheel and troughs conveying the water from the reservoir lying at a distance are nearly worn out This is the wheel today. By 1817, so the wheel lasted another, how many years? Another 12 years from the commissioner's report. But by 1817, the water wheel and the troughs were in need of replacement. So the wheel we see here today, which is wider and of a smaller diameter, is sadly not Smeaton's. The only clue to John Smeaton's water wheel is in the construction of the wheel pit. Here, we can see that the pit was originally built for a wheel of a larger diameter and a narrower wheel, Smeaton's wheel. So these stones, which, sorry, if we can go, oh no, sorry. I'll not try to be clever with this. I was going to illustrate that the original wheel pit was only a matter of inches from the wheel itself, so there was no water turbulence. So that's the ghost of Smeaton's wheel. Now this is Stubblick Chimney. It's a well-known landmark near the A686 between Alston and Hexham. It's situated at the end of a long horizontal overground flue, which actually runs under the course of the road now towards Langley Smelt Mill. It drew away the poisonous fumes from the lead smelting mill at Langley, and it's of a much later date than the mill itself. In his book about the Greenwich Hospital, Philip Newell states that neither the Derwentwaters nor the adventurers undertook the smelting of lead ore. They sold it and others made the profit by smelting. In Smeaton's time, the hospital built its own lead mill at Langley to smelt some of its duty ore. Instead of collecting rent in cash, the commissioners would collect rent in kind, which was lead ore, which they then gave to other people to smelt and process. So rather than that, the economics of the day, Smeaton realized that it would be more profitable for the company to smelt their own lead. So this is Langley Smelt Mill in its later days, looking for all the world like a small village. Up to the 1760s, the Greenwich Hospital had generally been content to follow the old customs established by the Derwentwater family, the former lords of the manor. John Smeaton and Nicholas Walton wrote many reports and surveys about the Greenwich Hospital mines, and together they studied the economics of the lead mines of Alston Moor. They reported on the feasibility of the hospital having its own smelt mill, instead of allowing others to do the smelting and reaping the rewards. The result was the construction of Langley Smelt Mill that began in 1766 and was ready for operation in January 1768. When finished, the profit from this mill alone was more than £1,500 per year. Here is a newspaper notice from 1775. Vandalism, or in this case sabotage, is nothing new. Early in 1775, a person or persons unknown cut and spoiled the leathers of 4 pairs of bellows and did other damage at Langley Smelt Mill. The reason for such an act is a mystery. The damage was extremely serious, as the reward indicates. Will receive a reward of £50 of the said Messrs. Walton and Smeaton. £50, a huge amount of money. I don't know how many weeks' wages it would have been for an ordinary leadminer. It might have been a year's wages offered by Walton and Smeaton for information leading to a conviction. Nothing more is known about this, but nevertheless, when the commissioners of the Greenwich Hospital visited the mill 6 years after its completion, they were delighted to see a cake of silver extracted from the lead ore, weighing more than 1,300 ounces, or 81 pounds, or 37 kilograms of solid silver. This is the plan for a new parish church, St Augustine's Church in Alston, drawn by John Smeaton and shown here by permission of Northumberland Record Office at Woodhorn near Ashington. In 1763, on a visit to Alston, Archdeacon for the diocese found that the old Norman church was in a very poor state of repair. He said that as the present fabric is so ruinous in every part that it can never effectually be repaired, 'tis strongly recommended to the parishioners to endeavour to raise money either by brief or subscription in order that the church may be rebuilt. In other words, he recommended that the church should be pulled down, and John Smeaton was asked to design a new one. So the old Norman church was demolished. And here, as with the plan of the old mill, we can see its outline. It's this dotted line from A to B to C to D, which is in effect the north aisle of the Norman church, D to E to F and back to A. A new one was built in record time in 1769 at the expense of the parishioners at a cost of about £1,500. This might seem cheap, but it was not unusual for local people to give their labour free of charge and cartage instead of donations of money. The pews, you'll note, the pews all face south. Here's the pulpit, which is strange to us today. And note that there is no chancel as such, only a three-sided apse. And here is Smeaton's church, photographed perhaps just before it was due to be demolished, in which case we owe the photographer a great debt. And here is the apse from the inside, and it's plain to see that it's no substitute for a proper chancel. Here's the altar rail, and the chancel or the apse disappears to nothing on either side. Another photograph taken at the same time as the first, or the other two, that Smeaton was an engineer rather than an architect is reflected by the comment on his design. In 1811, 40 years after it was built, St Augustine's was described as a good church, a modern structure. In 1829, it was still a good modern edifice. In 1833, to mine surveyor and author Thomas Sopwith, it was a plain and neat edifice, the interior remarkably so. 1847 saw the church described as a neat and well-built structure, but destitute of architectural ornament. It consists of a nave and one of those modern projections at the east end intended to be as an apology for a chancel. By 1858, it was a plain stone building without any pretensions to architectural design or beauty. This plain church did not match up to high church Victorian tastes, and the low church Methodists were building much more ornate chapels, notably St Paul's Chapel at Townhead in Alston. So after only 100 years, a very short life for a church, Smeaton's church was demolished and a new one was built from the foundations in 1869, described as handsome edifice in the early English style, to was designed by G.D. Oliver of Carlisle at a cost of £6,000. Interestingly, though, it stands almost exactly on the foundations of John Smeaton's church. Among the hundreds of reports and designs for canals, land drainage, sluices, docks, harbours, the tidal pump at London Bridge, bridges, lighthouses, corn mills, machines, water pumps for mines, fire engines, blast machines, etc. by John Smeaton, there is not one design listed for a church. Was Smeaton's church in Alston unique among his works? If it was, what a pity that such a significant building should be demolished in favour of an off-the-peg, one-size-fits-all Victorian design. Or am I being too cynical? Touch of favouritism shown here. The Nentforce level is the work for which John Smeaton is most famous or infamous in the region. The level was planned in 1775 as a tunnel to discover new veins of lead or at lower levels than the current mine workings, and to drain the existing mines so that they could be worked conveniently and economically without the effort and expense of having to pump out water. If you'd like to learn about the Nentforce level, this book is the one to read. And from the cover, you can see that it was navigable by boat, even into the photographic era. Although John Smeaton is credited with the original concept, it was his colleague Nicholas Walton who travelled to London in 1775 to present the proposals to the Greenwich Hospital commissioners. Smeaton's original scheme was for a level with a cross-section area of 3'6" by 7 foot, or 76 centimetres by 2.1 metres, the size of a typical horse level, which demonstrates that his intention was for a drainage level only. Here we see part of the original plan of the level the plan is held by Cumbria Records Office in Carlisle. It's been beautifully copied by J. Lawson in February 1988 and badly photographed by Alastair Robertson in May 2024. I openly admit I'm not the world's best photographer. Here's the central section of the plan from the copy held in the archives of Nenthead Mines Conservation Society, whose catalogue is online if anybody cares to explore it. Incidentally, the Alston Moor Historical Society catalogue is also online, the archive catalogue. But back to the plan. It's worth noting that the title states quite plainly that the purpose of the level is for the discovery of veins and unwatering the sills. As it was originally planned, the Nentforce level was not intended to be an underground canal. Also, you can't see it, but the names are Walton and Smeaton, not Smeaton and Walton. Was it John Smeaton's modesty that put Nicholas Walton first? Or did Nicholas Walton have a greater part in the scheme than he was given credit for? Here we see that the level goes, this is the River Nent. I should have explained this. This is the River Nent going up the valley, and the level is the straight line below the river. And here we see that the level goes off rather vaguely off the plan to the right towards Nenthead, while it's quite precise as far as Nensbury, where the canal section was eventually abandoned. So here's a map of the area with the rivers South Tyne and the River Nent going up to Nenthead. And the level, the Nentforce level, is in red, with the dots showing the various shafts. Construction of the original the original small level began under Smeaton's direction in 1776. But this was the age of canals, not only above ground, but below ground as well. And soon, on the suggestion of John Gilbert, agent to the famous Duke of Bridgewater in Derbyshire with all his canals, John Gilbert was often in the north, the Nentforce scheme was changed to an underground canal, and the cross-sectional area was enlarged 9 feet by 9 feet, or 3 meters by 3 meters, to allow canal barges to travel along it and to pass each other. After many years, and after a vast expense, and after much deliberation as to the very future of the level, the decision was taken by the commissioners of the hospital in 1817 to raise the level by 150 feet or 45 meters nearer to the surface at Nensbury Hag's shaft. The idea of canal barges was abandoned and the level continued as a drainage level and as a much smaller tunnel to Nenthead. In 1842, 76 years after its commencement, the Nentforce level was completed in a modified form at a final cost. As we can see, the figures here have been rounded down. The final cost was £81,270, 18 shillings and 11 pence 3 farthings, about £7.5 million today. The engraved commemorative stone plaque is now on display in the foyer of Alston Town Hall. It used to be at the entrance to the Nentforce level, but the entrance itself was caved in, demolished, filled in, sometime in the early 1900s when quarrying operations started for limestone to be taken away by rail. Unfortunately, by 1842, the name of John Smeaton's partner, Nicholas Walton, had either been forgotten or misread by someone, and the name of Richard Walton Jr. was recorded for posterity. Poor Nicholas must have turned in his grave, or maybe he was so modest that he just shrugged his shoulders and thought, so what? The Nentforce level discovered no significant lead veins, but water was drained from the existing mines, allowing them to be worked safely at lower levels without having to be pumped dry, so improving safety, reducing costs, and allowing access to viable lead mines, known viable lead mines at lower levels. Writing in 1890, the lead mine agent and historian William Wallace believed that the Nentforce level has proved a total failure. Well, I disagree, or at least I think the case should be reopened. This is the bridge over the River Tyne at Hexham today. In a competition to design a bridge in 1756, John Smeaton submitted an entry, but it was not adopted. The bridge that won the competition was one to a design by John Gott, the engineer to the Ayr and Calder Canal in West Yorkshire. But it was swept away in the disastrous flood of the River Tyne in 1771, when only one bridge remained standing on the whole length of the river from Alston to Tynemouth. How people crossed the river after that, we don't know. But it was not until 1777 that John Smeaton, in the year of his resignation from the Greenwich Hospital, produced a design for a new bridge. It took 3 years to build, from 1777 to 1780. And interestingly, in 1778, a diving bell was used in the construction of a cofferdam. Only 2 years after its completion, in 1782, Smeaton's bridge was destroyed in a flood. He had not made sufficient allowance on the foundations for the scouring effect during an exceptional flood. As Professor Smeaton writes, in December 1783, John Smeaton stood on the riverbank where he viewed and surveyed the ruins of his bridge. Professor Smeaton claims that it was the only serious practical mistake in Smeaton's whole career, and Smeaton felt it. This is a bit fuzzy, but it's part of John Smeaton's letter of resignation. It's claimed that during his time with the Greenwich Hospital at Nenthead, he introduced an improved design for water wheels, which greatly increased their efficiency in draining the mines, that he introduced horse levels and improved ventilation. He was also involved in land surveying, which was very important in determining property boundaries to work the valuable lead below. John Smeaton left the Greenwich Hospital at his own request on the plea of other heavy commitments. In 1775, after 10 years' employment with the hospital, he had so much business as a civil engineer that he wished to resign then, but he was persuaded to remain another 2 years. So it was in 1777 that the commissioners received a letter from him. In the minutes of the meeting, he was described simply as one of the receivers of the Derwentwater estate, just in case some of the commissioners didn't know who John Smeaton was. The minute continued, dated the 16th of March last, setting forth his inability to perform the duties of that employment in the manner he could wish, without being put to the greatest difficulty and hurry in the execution of his business, of his profession as a civil engineer, and desiring permission to resign his said employment as a receiver on the 21st of November next. So here we see John Smeaton, with his genuine signature, offering his resignation on the 16th of March, 1777, but to take effect from the 27th of November next. Nevertheless, John Smeaton returned to Alston Moor on at least one occasion. This example survives from 1779, some 18 months or so after his formal departure. It occurred when a dispute arose in 1778 about working the Rampgill mineral vein near the county boundary with Northumberland. According to a report dated the 15th of October, 1778, the boundary was surveyed and agreed by Joseph Hilton. Here we have Joseph Hilton, the Moor Master for the Greenwich Hospital on Alston Moor, and Joseph Dickinson, the chief agent for the Blacketts of Allendale. But Robert Percival, the principal agent to the London Lead Company, objected to their findings. And so John Smeaton, as a trusted and disinterested party, was called in to check the survey. Fortunes could be made or lost on such decisions, so this award was critical to both the London Lead Company and to the Blacketts of Allendale. We can't actually read it. Oh, maybe you can. This line here. Smeaton found that the boundary, as determined by Hilton and Dickinson, was 18.5 inches out, 46 centimeters adrift. Now, how precise is that? And signed by John Smeaton. And here's the plan of the dialing, with the dialing points, with the slight changes of direction. It's the plan of the dialing for fixing the boundary of Rampgill Vein and Coldclough in the next valley in the low workings in the Great Limestone, performed the 7th and 8th of May, 1779 by John Smeaton, engineer, assisted by Mr. Percival, agent to the Governor and Company, and Mr. Dickinson, head agent to Sir Thomas Blackett. Joseph Dickinson had unfortunately died in the meantime. So the plan is dated the 8th of May, 1779, and it's determined the working limits for both parties of the lead mines beneath the surface. At the top right, just up in the top right corner here, is a note labelled "Low Workings Disputed," which were found by the survey to be on the Alston Moor side of the county boundary, give or take 18.5 inches. In fact, take 18.5 inches. The survey below ground depended largely on an iron wedge driven into the side of the Rampgill level. It'd be interesting to know if that wedge is still there. But all parties abided by the findings, by John Smeaton's findings, and this is the last that we know of John Smeaton on Alston Moor. In the words of Professor Skempton, The experience of the failure of the Tyne Bridge at Hexham in 1782 shattered John Smeaton's confidence in himself. But he obviously didn't let it affect him, because he picked himself up and carried on working until his death 10 years later at the age of 68, 6 weeks after suffering a stroke. John Smeaton was the first man in the world to call himself a civil engineer when he used the term in 1768. He left the Greenwich Hospital in 1777 at his own request on the plea of other heavy commitments. In Professor Skempton's biography, Smeaton's 12-year tenure as a receiver in the north for the Greenwich Hospital receives hardly a mention. Nevertheless, 55 years later, the mine agent, surveyor, and author Thomas Sopwith, in his book of 1833, The Mining Districts of Alston Moor, Weardale, and Teesdale, believed that it is not improbable that the powerful mind of Smeaton and the effective works planned by him gave a stimulus to mining. For since that period, both the practical skill and the spirit of adventure have rapidly increased. And I think that note of praise for Smeaton is a good note on which to end the talk.